Islamic democracy and Islamic fundamentalism, political Islam. The state-religion relations in predominantly Muslim countries Asia is currently the world problem. Political and religion extremism, terrorism and radical religious movements is constantly on the agenda of all leading powers, claiming to be the best from the political regime, democracy. Europe and USA is trying to impose its vision of an optimal future for the countries with different culture and religion. Muslim countries denied their own understanding of state-religion relations, denied without consideration of the wishes and priorities of Muslims in the political system of their own countries, are denied because of, in the most Western democratic societies, many social functions of religion successfully performed the so-called civil religion. The essential feature such as a society is pluralism. The pluralism shouldn't be mixed with the multi-confessional of society. Religion pluralism in a democratic society means the desire to break the link between religion and policy, proclaiming religion a private matter of citizens. In this case, the model is declared optimal for the human future without consideration of the alternatives. Religion is a group of affiliations based on the belief system, ideas about the divine, morality and justice. Religiosity is a depth of belief, practice, values and commitment of an individual who subscribes to religion's ideas. Religions and religiosity are linked, but religious affiliation alone does not mean engaging in active belief, practice of commitment. Religion can affect preferences through religiosity. First, religiosity helps form an individual's identity by shaping his or her values, beliefs, and practice. Religiosity constitutes the self. Therefore, religiosity affects one's social and political values, outlook, and preferences. Religious references, language, values, and symbols are likely to provide a source of legitimacy to active believers. Second, religion's identical component sets forth values and moral codes about justice and moral government. In case of state-religious relations, European political thought is based on the international understanding of consciousness freedom. Freedom of consciousness, including the religious freedom, is estimated as the natural, inalienable and sacred right. As such, the principle of consciousness freedom and religion written in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the law of most Europe countries and the USA. According to the Act of Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, signed in Helsinki on August 1, 1975, the participating states will respect human rights and fundamental freedoms, including the freedom of thought, consciousness, religion and belief, for all without distinction as to race, sex, language or religion. Shall recognize and respect the freedom of the individual to confess individually or together with others, religion or belief acting in accordance with their own consciousness. The Constitution of the Russian Federation, Article 28, approved the right ideological choice, including freedom of consciousness and religion. At the same time, Article 14, proclaiming the Russian Federation is a secular state, notes that no religion can be established as a state or obligatory, since all religious associations shall be separated from the state and equal before the law. In 2001, the Council of Muftis of Russian adopted a document, Main Provisions of the Social Program of Russian Muslims, which outlines the basic provisions of Islam in the sphere of the relations of the Muslims with a secular government. The state and its law are seen as a result of the agreement of all social groups about the general rules of coexistence on a single side or in a single legal and economic system. The state and its law are the means of ensuring the fundamental rights and freedoms of all its citizens. In the case of a destruction of a constitutional base, of the stopping of legitimate institution, of state power and establish a political regime that does not respect basic human rights, Muslims reserve the right to consider the performance of their obligations under the contract. Islam does not prescribe to the people of any particular form of a government, leaving it to the discretion of the faithful citizen of country in accordance with established in it traditional and political culture. Islam, not unlike Christianity, offers a vision of a just society and government, even if a theology does not prescribe definitive political institution. This includes religion's teaching on justice, crime and punishment, the poor, woman and war. In 1980s, in the North Caucasus, widely spread the teaching of Islamic fundamentalism, political Islam, with own vision of a political system. It spread and established due to the process of revival of Islam in the condition of worsening socio-economic and political situation. A sharp stratification of people on the social and material grounds, impoverishment as a result of economic disruption, massive unemployment and rising crime. The main criterion for the allocation of fundamentalism as a self-teaching is its appeal to a pure Islam and the return to the fundamentals of Islamic spirituality. The alternative to fundamentalism in understanding the political system could be Islamic democracy, what it wants to see residents of predominantly Muslim countries. The several decades scholars, policymakers and Muslim religious leaders and activists have debates to critical questions. Do Muslims want democracy? Are they inevitably prone to favor some form of political Islam? These questions have enormous implications, especially as the United States attempts to influence democratic transitions in predominantly Muslim countries, from Kyrgyzstan to Afghanistan to Iraq. Question about the democratic desires of Muslims is under two major and interrelated debates about religion and politics. The first is a decades-long polarized debate about religion's effect on support for democracy. Huntington's civilizationists, as well as many culturalists, expect Islam to determine Muslims' political preference. Islamic theology and culture, they argue, is inherently undemocratic. Other scholars contend that all religions are multivocal and that Islam's political role has varied over time. Therefore, they argue Islam is not inherently anti-democratic. Public opinion studies consistently argue that Muslim religion does not affect democratic support, or that Muslims overwhelmingly support democracy. A second and related debate concerns the root of popular support for political Islam, Islamism, a 20th, 21st century political movement characterized by religio-political ideology that rejects democracy and called for Islam state, law, or constitution based on the Sharia, or a caliphate. The civilizationist view, prominent in media and policy circles, roots political Islam in unchanging theocratic Islam religion that is anti-democratic, anti-Western, and jihadist. Most political scientists have countered that neither religion nor religiosity causes popular support for political Islam. The above theories make different predictions about the causes of Muslim support for opposition to democracy and political Islam, but exhibit common problems. Culturalists reduce religiosity to an ethno-cultural affiliation. Civilizationists equate religions with religiosity, essentializing religion and ignoring variation and change over time. And the most studies assume one conception of democracy rather than asking whether Muslims understand democracy in the secular terms of Western liberal theory. Empirical trends point to religiosity as a potentially important independent variable when studying regime preferences. We see it in political fundamentalism in the Republic of the former USSR. In Europe, democracy is understood to mean liberal democracy. Liberal democracy demands free, fair, regular, and competitive elections, civilian control, a constitutional system with no domains of power for actors unaccountable to the electorate, horizontal accountability, universal suffrage, and broad equal political and civil liberties, including religious freedom. Since Enlightenment, liberal democratic theorists have advocated secularism as essential to democracy, so that no one religion has institutionalized political power or is privileged as the basis of law. Strict separation has been violated in some Western democracies with established churches. However, even in such cases, no religion has institutionalized power over the state. Nor is one religion considered the basis for law or the constitution. Secularism is thus a key component of liberal democracy, whether in assertive or passive form. The former seeks to expunge religion from the public square, example, restricting public Islamic dress in Turkey. Under passive secularism, example, US, the state seeks to maintain neutrality toward all religions. Since we are interested in learning what kind of democracy instead of fundamentalism Muslims prefers, namely whether they view democracy in the secular, as assertive or passive, and liberal terms that have become the ideal in Western democracies. We're looking for information about support for secular democracy and Islamic democracy. These terms are widespread in these regions because Muslim scholars, religious leaders, and politicians have introduced them into the discourse about democracy and constitutions by contrasting secular or Western democracy with Islamic democracy, an alternative form of democracy. Kathleen Collins and Erica Owens did a survey using the methods of focus groups about the understanding of democracy in Azerbaijan and Kyrgyzstan in 2007. Most respondents defined secular democracy as freedom, freedom of religion, and freedom of speech. Critics of secular democracy generally opposed both expunging religion from the public sphere, assertive secularism, and religion neutrality, passive secularism. They argued that secular democracy facilitated moral decline. As one woman said, under secular democracy there is too much democracy and freedom. Focus group interviewed consisting of women, students, grad students, Baku and Azerbaijan. What constitutes Islamic democracy is a subject of debate. Islamic democracy is an increasingly silent concept and its appeal needs to be studied. It needs to be studied for its opposition to fundamentalist Islam. Seen as an alternative to secular democracy, even passive secular democracy, Islamic democracy may be a system in which some liberal democratic principles, such as women's rights, religion minorities' freedoms, and other individuals' rights, are circumscribed at the expense of religious norm or law that privilege Islam and one interpretation of Islam. As appeared, Kathleen Coles and Erica Owen had done a survey in focus group respondents favoring Islamic over secular democracy as a typical favorite limiting women's work. Some even opposite women in political office. One justified such as a law religiously. The prophet even said that there will be no wealth where the leader is a woman. Focus group interview consisting of a man, students, grad students, Azerbaijan. Some favored legalizing polygamy and restricting a woman's right to initiate divorce. Some favored enforcing to the hijab, thought most simply wanted freedom to wear the hijab. In contrast to secular democrats, they often favored banning non-Islamic missionary activity and sometimes banning conversion from Islamic to Christianity. One respondent, Alvin, led other supporters of Islamic democracy in stating that religious minorities should not have the right to proselytize because they are a threat to Islam. Another respondent, Rufat, expressed a less common viewpoint among Muslim democrats in the study. There is a hayat in the Quran. Everyone is equal. lie with them, non-Muslim, as with a brother. Muslim Democrats almost universally favor Islamic education in public school, said one Azerbaijan woman. Much of the state must be Islamic. Student education must include the Quran study to prevent young from going down the wrong path. Finally, most supporters of Islamic democracy favored at the least some Sharia law that also opposes religious leaders in the state and endorses democratic elections. Eskander, an Azerbaijan supporter of Islamic democracy, argued, all law should be by Sharia, there should be an Islamic Sharia constitution. Yet, he added, religious leaders must have a role in government, but it seems to me that the opinion of religious leaders should remain on the sideline. He favored Islamic party competitions in election. A group of women anonymously supporting Islamic democracy agreed that an Islamic Sharia constitution is better, because with Islamic Sharia are its own laws. Global survey findings reinforce this characterization of Islamic democracy from our qualitative data. Fish argues that Muslims are less supportive than non-Muslims of a certain liberal democratic values and rights, including women's rights, abortion, divorce, and homosexual rights, and more strongly opposite non-believers holding public office. Thus, Islamic democracy is distinct from political Islam, but it also likely to be an illiberal form of democracy. A preference for Islamic democracy over secular democracy suggested at least a strong symbolic attachment to an Islamic-oriented constitution and laws, belief that the state should help preserve Muslim morality, and rejection of a normative secular model of Western democratic theory. Some Muslim Democrats do hold liberal democratic views compatible with a passive secular democracy, but many appear to support Islamic democracy as a constitutional alternative to secular democracy. Political Islam, Islamism, Islam fundamentalism, as noted above, is a modern phenomenon that calls for Islam as a political ideology. We must conceptually distinguish between those who accept democracy and fully free election, though favoring democracy of an Islamic form, Islamic democracy, and those who reject democracy in favor of another form of Islamic state. In this categorization, only the later seek Islamism or political Islamic regime.